What is government? A simple question without a simple answer. Government means different things to different people, with definitions varying according to geography, political ideology. What is government? A simple question without a simple answer. Government means different things to different people, with definitions varying according to geography, political ideology, and academic and professional discipline. In this video, you will be introduced to the concept of government understood from the Australian public law perspective. The starting point for nearly every discussion of Australian public law is the Australian Constitution. So what does it say about government? Well, quite a lot. For present purposes, let's focus on four aspects. First, the Constitution establishes Australia as a constitutional monarchy. The opening words of Section 1 of our Constitution state, "The legislative power of the Commonwealth shall be vested in a federal parliament, which shall consist of the Queen, a Senate, and a House of Representatives." Constitutional monarchy is not the only form of government, however. There are also republics, dictatorships, and theocracies, to name but a few. Can you think of countries that have one of these other forms of government? Second, the Constitution establishes Australia as a parliamentary democracy. We will study what this means in more detail later in the unit. For present purposes, it suffices to note that Australia operates under a system of representative and responsible government. Representative government is a democratic form of government in which those with the power to govern are elected by the people on whose behalf they govern. Responsible government describes a system in which those persons who carry out or administer laws enacted by Parliament are responsible, that is, accountable, to the Parliament for the manner with which they do so. These persons are collectively referred to as the executive. We will come back to the executive shortly. Third, the Constitution establishes Australia as a federal system with a Commonwealth or federal government and state governments. Federalism too is discussed in more detail later in the unit. And fourth, the Constitution provides that the Australian government has three arms: Parliament, Executive, and Judiciary. Each of these arms is the focus of dedicated attention in this unit. For now, a brief introduction to each and their interrelationship will suffice. First, there is Parliament. As noted previously, at the federal level, Parliament, also referred to as the legislature, is made up of the Queen, represented by the Governor-General, and the elected Senate and House of Representatives. Parliament makes and amends legislation. Next, there is the Executive. The Executive is the arm of government responsible for carrying out or administering laws enacted by the Parliament. The term also refers to ministers from the governing party who make policy decisions, present that policy to Parliament in the form of proposed laws, namely bills, and are responsible to Parliament for the implementation of that policy and the day-to-day administration of government. Third is the Judiciary. The Judiciary adjudicates disputes about the validity and application of the law. Doing so serves a valuable role holding both the Parliament and Executive accountable. So that tells us what government is. Now let's turn our focus to what government does. Governments govern. Both words derive from the Latin gubernor, meaning to pilot, steer, or direct. Understood in this manner, governance is the manner, method, or system by which a particular society is steered or directed, and government is the set of institutions that steer or direct, or coordinate the steering or direction of that society. However, this definition allows for great variation with respect to what should be steered or directed, for what purpose, and how. So let's pull it apart a bit. Let's start with government's purpose, its role. This is the coat of arms for the state of Victoria. The words in the shield are peace and prosperity. This sums up government's purpose well: to provide the people on whose behalf they govern with peace and security, and a good standard of living and quality of life. But let's drill down a little deeper. We also live in a society that is both capitalist and liberal. What does this mean? Capitalist denotes an economic system in which ownership of production, distribution, and wealth exchange is primarily in the hands of private individuals and organisations, and which embraces the principles of free markets, property rights, consumer sovereignty, and the rule of law. Liberal denotes a society that values individual autonomy, human rights, liberty, and social equality, and recognises government's role in securing and protecting those rights. These values, capitalism and liberalism, can sometimes come into conflict. Governments, for example, can find themselves simultaneously being asked to create an environment in which markets can flourish while protecting citizens from the worst excesses of those markets, to balance market efficiency and private wealth creation with societal demands for justice, equity and fairness. Not an easy task. So how do governments go about seeking to achieve this balance? A useful way to think about what governments do is through a functional classification. Functionally, government and governing is about four things: providing goods, services and infrastructure, such as schools, hospitals and roads; distributing and redistributing wealth through taxes and welfare payments; regulating behaviour through rules that govern everything from what we can eat, drink and smoke to whom we can marry and when; and constituting or establishing the legal and institutional framework necessary for a society to function, such as private property rights and courts for adjudicating disputes. So how do governments perform these functions? The answer to this question often depends on the task at hand. However, there generally are three principal modes of governance. First, there is hierarchical governance. Hierarchical governance has government steering directly and from above, sometimes in a command and control manner, either through the direct provision of infrastructure and services, or by controlling societal behaviour and conduct through rules and regulation. Governance by markets, on the other hand, sees society steered by the invisible hand of the market. The emergence of the Internet of Things is an example of this. This is not to say there is no role for government, however. In modern societies, markets cannot function effectively without some laws and regulations to ensure that contracts are honoured, consumers are protected, and businesses are constrained from engaging in anti-competitive conduct. And third is governance through networks. Governance through networks sees governments collaborating with non-government and private entities to address common problems and pursue common opportunities. Workplace health and safety, where government, employers, and workers and their unions cooperate to improve workplace safety, is an example of this. Can you think of other issues which governments do largely themselves? Issues which governments leave to the market, and issues which governments manage in collaboration with non-government and private entities? The neatness of this classification is complicated, however, by the fact that as society has become more complex, governments increasingly are relying on the private sector to deliver services previously thought the exclusive domain of government. For example, we now have essential infrastructure such as roads and utilities constructed and operated by private companies. Private companies also now run prisons and detention centres and perform law enforcement functions. This has seen the line between the public and private become blurred. The implications of this for government accountability is important. We will touch on this a number of times throughout the unit. So having given you an overview of government and what it does, the last thing I want to discuss with you is, where does the law fit in? I have alluded to the role of the law a few times already, but let's look at its role more specifically. Broadly speaking, the law operates in two ways, one functional, the other expressive, as illustrated on this PowerPoint. The functional role has three dimensions. First, the law shapes behaviour by permitting or encouraging some conduct and preventing or sanctioning other conduct. Examples include criminal and tort law. Second, the law facilitates certain behaviours, including both private arrangements and government functions, as well as its own functioning and administration. Contract law, property rights, and administrative law are examples of this second type. And third, the law adjudicates disputes between private entities and governments, and between governments. Courts are traditional examples of this. Mediation and arbitration, more recent examples. The manner with which the law performs these functions gives expression to important constitutional, democratic, ethical, moral, and shared societal values. This is law's expressive role. How the law protects fundamental rights that may be infringed by government action is a good example of this, and something we will focus on later in this unit. Some countries have bills or charters of rights that place certain rights beyond the reach of the legislature. Other countries, Australia included, allow the legislature to abrogate fundamental rights, provided it is explicit in doing so. Another good example is the ease or difficulty with which citizens can challenge government decision-making. Subjecting government action to review by courts guards against unfair and arbitrary government action and gives effect to important constitutional and public law values and principles that we will discuss in this unit. These include the rule of law, equal protection and treatment before the law, constitutionalism, limited government, and accountable government through the judiciary acting as a check and balance on the government's exercise of power. So in summary, the law is central to what governments do. The law provides the vehicle through which governments undertake their core functions of provision, redistribution, and regulation. The law establishes institutions to undertake government activities, creates and shapes the tools those government institutions use, furnishes the infrastructure for enforcement and dispute resolution, and establishes mechanisms through which government institutions and officials are held accountable for the decisions they make and the activities they undertake. And the manner with which the law discharges these functions says a lot about a society's values and priorities. In particular, its respect for the rule of law and for individual, commercial, and communal rights. I hope you have found this topic interesting. Your lecturers look forward to discussing the concepts covered in this video with you in lectures.